welcome to the Astrology Interview with two of my astrological teachers. As I was going up the years of training to become an astrologer with the Faculty of Astrological Studies. So lovely Carole Taylor and lovely Kim Farley. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about how you sort of the guidelines you would like to offer about the best way to start reading a chart. And I'm also very interested in the fact that you started up your own organization, and the fact that you're offering really fantastic workshops for every level of astrologer to come and deepen their understanding about astrology. But I'm particularly interested in the fact you're going to be offering workshops on mental health. But let's just start with what you're doing and, yes, how you've come together to offer this. Carole, do you want to start?
Yes, well, in terms of Asteria, Kim and I have been colleagues for years. We were colleagues at the Faculty of Astrological Studies for decades. And we both left there in 2023 and we founded Asteria. In fact, Asteria was an idea that we'd had for a while before we left. And it was the idea of working in our own particular way with astrology, because I think Kim and I are very much aligned. I know that we're very much aligned in terms of how we think about astrology, how we practice it. We're very different as characters, but actually the integration of two personalities in one organization has been really fruitful. But we're aligned in the way that we think about astrology. And we both spent such a long time working at the faculty. I was part of the organizational side as well. You know this, a lot of your listeners and the viewers here will know that I was the vice president, I was the president for 3 years, director of studies, summer school organizer for a long time. So I was well embedded in the way that the faculty was functioning and how it organized itself. And I think they've probably still got course material from both of us there. So
read it.
There's a huge legacy there. There's a huge legacy there from both of us. But I think I speak for myself. I think I came to the point where I really wanted to teach astrology in a different way. And, you know, the idea of having a written examination system, a very formal examination system, requires there to be a backbone of a syllabus. And then you get into this idea of a kind of a set way of doing astrology, which doesn't always allow for a sense of creativity and a sense of the student themselves coming to really understand what astrology means to them and to express it according to their own personality. And the idea of examinations, of a formal examination system, I think can also get in the way of the connection, a personal connection between the tutor and the student, which allows that student to really develop themselves and grow down into the astrology and make it their own, and to really touch into their personal sense of creativity and what being an astrologer means to them. And there's no one size fits all way of being an astrologer. So that's what I think both of us wanted to connect to. And of course, when you're training astrologers or when you're working with astrologers or people who want to be astrologers, you've got to help them to become a safe pair of hands. You've always got to work ethically and support that process. But also what we wanted to do was to allow people to become confident in themselves. And to a certain extent, I think that means freeing yourself from the perceived rules and regulations in order to be able to really understand what astrology, what place it has in your own life and how it grows from you as a person and not just from a process of learning particular subjects and passing an exam in those subjects. I think there's something deeply personal about it.
So that's so interesting, isn't it? For me, it's about also intuition. You know, there wasn't a lot of room for encouraging that. But anyway, we'll come back to that when we're talking about reading chart. So Kim, for you, what was it for you that sort of sparked off this desire to work with Carole?
Well, I mean, Carole and I, as she said, have very similar approaches, or, the way that we feel about our practice and teaching, indeed, um, has always been on the same page. And, you know, over the years, after meetings, we would have this, we must do something together one of these days, and that day did come. And both of us are thrilled by it because, yeah, I've never liked the feeling of being hidebound or having to play by strict rules. Yeah, I just don't have that kind of personality. I don't know. You can blame
You
Uranus on the
do,
North
Kim.
Node in the 11th house or something like that. But I was always the sort of heretic, really. But I was also the granny. I'd been within that organization for 30 plus years. And I wanted to be free to do astrology the way that it made sense to me. And I wanted to be alongside somebody who felt the same way. And I was tired of not being listened to in terms of these exams do not bear a relationship to a practicing consultation. It's like that was one of the things. And also they were punitive, and people get frit. You can teach astrology, but you can't teach confidence. And there's a remarkable lack of support out there for people finding their feet. So we both originally, I think, conceived Asteria as a kind of mentoring resource for people who are already at some level into their astrological practice, even if it was just for their own, personal growth. We wanted to be supportive and encouraging, and not so much supervision in the classic sense, but being alongside people,
Yes.
because there isn't that out there. There's lots of learn astrology out there, but there's no what is it like being an astrologer, and how can you land in that? And it took me years, I think, to feel even vaguely like I knew what I was doing. And
Yeah. Yeah, there
yeah,
was a really interesting thing. I think it was Steve Judd. I might be wrong, but I think he said he learned astrology yonks ago, and it took him 10 years to become what he classified as a decent astrologer. And I agree.
you learn by doing, don't you?
We don't understand that it is a constant opening process and unfolding, a constant learning, isn't it?
Yes.
I'll never stop learning. Every
And
client I see, it's like, oh my God, I
And
didn't.
it's the qualities in yourself too, so much of
Yes,
being a good astrologer is the same thing about being a good human, having empathy for people, being able to listen well,
yes.
hearing what people say, receiving and seeing them and recognizing them rather than trying to blat them with some kind of, you know, astro download. It's,
I
yeah.
mean, it is important. I mean, I just see Carole, how you feel about this, because, I think it is important to understand the nuts and bolts, isn't it? You've got to know vaguely what Mars in, I don't know, in Libra in the third house means, but then to be open enough and flexible enough to allow the client to have their own experience of that.
I absolutely. I mean, in terms of how long does it take to learn how to be an astrologer, I think maybe people listening to Steve Judd's experience there of 10, it took me 10 years, would be a little put off by the idea of stepping over the line to train as an astrologer. I think one can learn the basics of reading a chart. It takes maybe a year to learn the nuts and bolts of the chart and learn how to put that together into an overall chart interpretation. It maybe takes another year to encompass the forecasting and really understand how to put the forecasting across to somebody in a live situation in a way that is going to be helpful and not predictive.
Yes.
Then you've got a variety of other subjects that you might want to learn and put into that: synastry, electional astrology, whatever it is that you want to think about. And of course, if you want to work with relationship astrology with synastry, you need to know something about relationships. That stands to reason. But this idea of a personal process is so important, because I think the life skills that you were talking about there, Kim, the idea of being able to listen to somebody, of being able to reach across to somebody, of being able to put that person center stage in the reading, and really support that person for that period of time, to really connect to them as a human being. Those are skills that we use all the time, actually, as friends, as family members, in our workplace. It's easy to think that an astrological training is all about going in and learning all the nuts and bolts and all the myriad of things that astrology can throw at you. But then you don't bring anything of yourself to it. So it's a process where you just train, and then you come out of the school or whatever it is fully formed. And I think that one of the most valuable training grounds is your own life. It's your own connection to life. It's your own connection to the people around you. It's how you conduct your own relationships. It's your own process of self-reflection, your own personal development, and putting that at the center of the process as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Where are you with all this, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably all of us would agree that things naturally evolve, don't they? You know, we start somewhere and then, you know, it unfolds. I ridiculously did my first face-to-face try to talk a little bit to somebody about their astrology in the most informal way, without pay, without expectation or assumptions or anything else. After my very first astrology beginners class, you know, the week later, I'm like, oh. So I think you do learn by listening to people and talking to people and hearing them speak their chart. And of course, now I'm vaguely horrified at the idea but I was so obsessed with it. I was so interested. And I think if you are interested in people, and if you are willing to really immerse yourself, that, you know, experience can be a matter of intensity rather than duration. But the evolution of it, I mean, for me, it used to take me days to prepare for a chart, and then I'd have this absurd thick wad of printed and handwritten notes sitting on my lap like a stone. And then my time boundaries were terrible. I'd be 3 hours with somebody because it was all just too interesting, you know. And it's like, and obviously things change. And I'm much more aware now of this, what I referred to before, about trying to meet a person where they are. And as they are, and not projecting onto them through the astrology, which is really easy to do, but just to receive them, you know, and experience them, and try and connect to what they need from this, or what makes sense to them, what's relevant for them, what's meaningful for them. I think to be very supportive.
I think that the key, isn't it? It's listening skills. And I feel that certainly when I was training with a lot. I mean, I'm a trained psychotherapist, so, and I've run a lot of workshops and stuff like that. So and actually listening workshops, because I think this is key skills. But there was an awful lot who wasn't even part of the process, and I wonder about that, whether part of the process needs to be basic counselling skills, because that's what you're dealing with people's trauma.
Yes.
You're dealing with people who are, something's very live for them. The synchronicity of them coming to an astrologer, or certainly in my experience of that, is, you know, they're facing a big thing. And it's probably, you know, when you look at this chart, let's say it's Saturn going over the ascendant or Pluto doing something, but they have no idea, and they're sitting on something that's extremely uncomfortable. So how do you two work with that? How do you support that trauma awareness? Carole, I'll come to you first.
I mean, it's absolutely true, I think, that people seek out astrologers when they are in a state of flux, change, crisis, perhaps trauma. I think years and years ago, and really just a couple of years maybe after I had got my faculty diploma and was, you know, well into my astrological career, I had 2 or 3 clients who were going through some really rough stuff. And I decided that it would be a very good idea for me to go away and get some proper counselling training. So I didn't get a professional qualification, but I did a series of courses. I got a counselling certificate, plus I did a whole load of other counselling courses. I was also a reflexologist, and in the context I was working, I had access to a number of professional supervisors who were all trained psychotherapists, and I took every bit of training that I could get in terms of interpersonal skills, listening skills. So I did a whole raft of things, and that was really helpful. I think you don't necessarily need to be a qualified psychotherapist or counsellor, but it really does help to have some formal context for being able to work with your own self-awareness, self-reflection, to have a formal process around that, maybe developing journaling, or just being with other people and having your stuff out there in the relationship process in a safe context, as you would in a counselling course or a psychotherapy course. So for me, that was really helpful. For me, that was, and professional supervision in an astrological context too. I did that for several years, and that was
really
helpful.
Interesting thing, because as a psychotherapist, you can't work as a professional psychotherapist unless you have supervision. And for me, I don't know where you are with this, Kim, but the depth I experience going in with my clients, I do need support with that.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of times, and I've been, that's a bit, where do I go with that? So yes, you offer supervision. So I just want you to explain a bit more about what happens there.
Well, we offer two mentoring programs, one for individuals deepening into their own chart and in a safe space to practicing their chart interpretation skills so they can find their feet, but also directly connecting to their own astrology. And the other one is we call professional supervisions, where the participants can bring charts that they're working on, case histories, if you like, that they're working with, and we can feel our way into them and, offer some perspective or some support and so on. I haven't done anything like classical counseling or therapeutic training, but about 14 years ago, I did funeral celebrancy training, and listening skills were a big part of that. And I, kind of a bit shamefaced to say, I think it probably did take me until 2011 to understand that I wasn't a very good listener, and how listening, who is it said the opposite of listening isn't talking, the opposite of listening is waiting. And that joke that she skewers, because we're so full of our own thoughts and we're not actually listening to the person, we're just waiting to say what, and I could certainly be guilty of that sometimes, or the me too, in terms of a fellow feeling and a sense of empathy, sort of jumping in, but realizing you don't want to like overtake somebody what they're trying to say. Just because you can relate doesn't mean that you should be talking about your own experience and things like that. Just basic human skills, as Carole said. And so I became much, much, much more aware of listening, and also how to ask people so that they might talk, because not everybody does talk, do they? Not everybody gives you stuff to listen to, but they have to be encouraged to do that. And that's a skill too.
Yes, I think that's absolutely. I mean, everybody's so individual, aren't they? What I find fascinating, I'd be so curious to see where you both are with this. You can prepare a chart, and you think, right, I've got, and then you meet them. It's only then that everything comes alive. I find that fascinating. I can get a good idea, but when I meet them, and just think, oh, that's how it works its way out. And they might be the only person that does it like that. It's such an individual thing.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I get really excited before meeting people for the first time, and really kind of eager to encounter them, because I've encountered my stories about them in my head, by looking at the chart. And then the reality of the person is always amazing. And okay, very, very, very rarely it like I can't make sense of it, or rather what I saw in the astrology doesn't seem to be coming to life in ways that I recognize in the person. But that's very, very rare. Most of the time it's like, oh God, yes,
Yeah. Kim, you talked about preparing charts. And I think that's a really useful thing to explore as well, because how do you prepare a chart? How long do you spend on preparing a chart? And then I'll come to Carole and see where she is. Because
like I said, it used to be days on end and it used to be an insane amount of notes. I think I needed that for my own ballast. And then I had the capacity to engage in the moment, because I think eye contact is really important. You can't be looking down or looking at your, computer or whatever. You have to be looking at the person. So these days, really, I give over the time immediately before the session. So I usually earmark a couple of hours, but in practice, it might only be an hour and a half or even an hour or whatever. I print material out still, but I try not to overprint. I don't tend to make written notes in the same way. I might do a little bit of shorthand, but I kind of try and land in the chart myself. And if you, I mean, it sounds a bit woo-woo, but let it speak to me, or see what I can hear from it and think about it. And I focus on. I like going in through the elements in particular and kind of finding a sort of initial ground to begin with. Sometimes the modes as well, but they don't. Sometimes they don't offer anything obvious. But the elements always speak to me, and angular planets and in important aspects, and the same with everybody, sun, moon, ascendant, and following those threads, following those pathways, and trying to stay open, trying to stay curious, trying to stay aware of all the different possibilities. But it's mostly going on in my head now, the preparation, whereas before it was almost always churning out great screeds of stuff, and these days I feel, I guess some of it's confidence, or feeling that I kind of know a lot more what I'm doing these days, and being aware of what we've said, which is to meet the person where they are. I certainly also print out the forecasting and think about the transits and think, and all of that, and highlight stuff and blah blah blah. Got my own technique, but yeah, it's much more streamlined these days. Yeah.
Carole.
Yeah.
Carole, how do you approach it?
Well, I think I'm pretty much the same as you are, Kim. I earmark a couple of hours beforehand. I may not always need all of that, but it means I don't have to rush. And I like to have a quarter of an hour before the client arrives on the Zoom screen, or very occasionally these days in person. And that quarter of an hour is like I've done all the preparation that I do is, like you, Kim, a lot of it is in my head. I will write down notes. I want to know what's in the chart. I want to be able to, I've got a very good short-term memory, so I'll put the chart in my head so I don't have to look down most of the time. I know what the transits are. I know what the main progressions are. I've got that right there. And obviously I know there's only a certain number of ways that you can list all the things that are important in a chart. As you said, Kim, the ascendant, the chart ruler, the sun, the moon, angular planets, the framework of the angles, the aspect patterns, the type major aspects. You know what's important. It doesn't take very long to really get that. Understand, what kinds of things are important. And it goes back, I think, to something that you said, Sue, about, how do you interpret Mars in Libra, I think was the example that you chose.
Yeah, the third.
You don't need to know everything there is to know about Mars in Libra. You don't.
Yeah.
Actually, what you need to know is that Mars is in Libra in your client's chart. You need to know roughly what Mars means, and you need to know what Libra means. And then you need to listen. So in other words, you can do those reams of notes. And like Kim, I also used to do lots and lots of notes, and then most of them would remain in a pile in front of me, and I'd never even look at them. But you have to listen, and you have to hear how that person, try to hear how that person is expressing that particular thing. And then your response is framed from what you already know about Mars in Libra, or whatever it happens to be. But it's also framed by what that person has just told you. And if you do a lot of notes and a lot of very complicated preparation, I think it cuts out You're focused so much on trying to put across what you the nice clever things that you've written down in your notes, and you're actually bypassing the things that the client is trying to tell you. So I think there comes a point where you need to have confidence in what you know and to work from that particular point. And it can be quite scary, I guess. But I've learnt to, I used to find that quarter of an hour before the client arrived, I used to find that quite a scary moment, because everything would drop out of my head and I think I don't know anything at all. And then I started to value that sense of not knowing anything, because you do your preparation, you know what you know, and then you lay that aside, and then you're in the moment with the person. I think that's a really valuable thing to remember.
I don't know if either of you experience this, but when I'm preparing a chart or looking at a chart, I'm getting ready to work with a client, I have intuitive feelings about something. I can even get a vision. Sometimes it's like an archetypal image. It's really odd. I don't know where it comes from, or a sentence will come to me. And I'll just say, I'll just try this out on you. What, does this resonate with you? And 99% of the time it does. It's really interesting. So there is this symbiosis going on with you and the client, even though that you've never met them, but you meet them the chart.
Absolutely. And I think part of that is remaining open to the possibility, isn't it? Not deciding, like none of us seems to anyway, that we know it all and we're just going to, hand over the tablets of truth and job done. It's about being interested and open. I don't get, I think, archetypal images so much as I might get lines of poetry or the idea of a particular novel or a scene from a film or things like that. But absolutely, intuitions and kind of visions, or imaginative narratives. Yeah. What about you, Carole?
I think it's valuable to remember that the chart is a map of symbols. The relationship with the client starts the moment they contact you, and it's very much in train while you're doing your preparation before you've met the client. The map of symbols, the symbols are each of them an archetypal field. So, and that chart has been inhabited by that person and lived, expressed in real time, in real experience, for all the time that the client has been alive, and it's been a resonant space for that person, and you're stepping into that, and the symbols have a living quality to them as archetypes. If we look at it in a Jungian sense, they have a living resonance, and you are creating a relationship to that. So to make room for that in the session, I think, is very valuable. To allow that to come alive. The archetypal images that you might have, the snippets of film or poetry, for me, a lot of it is about mythological threads. I'm heavily into myths and fairy tales. I'm going to be doing a workshop with Claire Martin in May about myths and fairy tales with astrology. So I'm deeply into all those archetypal stories. And so that's something that really resonates for me. So to get a snippet of that, to get a sense of that, and just to allow that to arise, and to not necessarily, you don't necessarily bring all of that into the session, but it will inform how you interpret the chart. And it can be, as you say, Sue, it can be really valuable, those intuitive insights, because astrology is both left brain and right brain. It's both the knowledge that you have, the intellectual side of it, but also this deeply intuitive side. You've really got to be able to pivot, or develop the capacity to pivot between those two things.
Yeah, and asking questions too. It's so important, because so many people, particularly early astrology students or students at the beginning of the subject, they think it's all about delivering information, and that somehow it's cheating or wrong or bad to ask questions, because it's like, well, you should know. And it's like, absolutely not. You need to ask questions to enable the person to reflect and to dialogue with you about it, or so you can hear what's meaningful for them, and how to ask questions as well. And
I think sometimes I experience clients kind of thinking it's fortune telling.
Yeah.
very clear with them, no, it's not. This is an exploration of the map of your world through your astrological chart. So this is your experience of life. And this is not fortune telling. That's not what I'm here for. And when they understand that, it sort of opens up the door for them they kind of put that aside. It's like they're not going to, there's nothing wrong with tarot card reading, by the way, but they're not going for that. It isn't that. And that allows for me, that always allows the communication to really open up between us both. Yeah. Is there anything that you would never go there in a chart when you see it? Is there some place that you're just, that's not where I won't go there with that?
I'll hand to Carole for that first, and because there is with me, yeah.
Okay, Carole.
Do you mean in terms of a place in the chart, like the 8th house or the 12th house or something like that? Or do you mean in terms of subject?
Something you just go, I'm just not going to go there.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. I mean, if you've got a pile up in the 8th house, that's not the place that you'd start. Or if somebody has Scorpio rising, I would always elect to, bearing in mind that somebody with Scorpio rising doesn't want the wool pulled over their eyes and they don't want you to stay on the surface. Yeah. But there is a certain guard that's put up, and quite naturally so. So that might be a client that stays quite silent for a particular portion of the chart reading until you've built up some trust. So I think you have to be careful about certain things that you might think about the chart, but you don't want to use that as your opening gambit. The client themselves may invite you to talk about the 8th house. In other words, they say something which resonates to it, and you carefully work your way into that if that's appropriate. But some things in the chart you might never actually really look at, or at least there might be ways that you think about it that you wouldn't start to talk about, because if you're working for 90 minutes with somebody, you have to build up trust, but it's also only 90 minutes, very often with a complete stranger. And so you have to be very careful with it. So there are certain things that I wouldn't comment on, or I'd let the client bring whatever it is that they wanted to say, and then I would use that as a way of just maybe working a little into it and then seeing what comes back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
we're all trained by the same organization, and they like to act as if sex doesn't exist, and that death is not a subject that humans ever encounter. But of course, I don't think any practicing consultant should ever dive into somebody's sex life without permission. In fact, without direct encouragement from the person. It's nothing to do with me how they conduct their sex life, unless they say, I'd like to talk about my sex life with you, in which case, great, But so that kind of thing. But I also think it's possible to refer to a person's, broadly speaking, sex life, desire, nature, whatever you want to say, without hitting it too squarely on the nose. Is that you can use language that refers to things, that allows people to talk about something in a particular way if they want to, without confronting them. So, yeah. And death, I just know, I work with people who are dying, or with people who are bereaved, and, in funeral celebrancy work, and that's a given. But there's no way that I want to look at how am I going to die, or when am I going to die, because it's just like I can't and won't. Even if I thought I could, even if I thought I could name the day that they were going to die, I would absolutely not be interested in doing so.
I think it's really interesting how many people want to talk about their relationship with death, but that's different.
That's fine.
Completely different.
Yeah.
Or somebody else who's dying around them. I get that. Well, I suppose because my history, I get a lot of that. But certainly I get a lot of clients who want to talk about their understanding what mortality is.
Sure.
And I find that really interesting. So just going to areas that are need perhaps more thought or more support or whatever. I'm very interested in astrology and mental health, particularly in our society where mental health issues are exploding, really. And I just want to talk to you about the fact you're going to be offering some workshops on mental health. Carole, why have you decided to do that? And how do you approach astrology and mental health?
Well, we're doing 3 workshops, one of which is going to be taken by our guest tutor for this term, which is Sue Tompkins, the wonderful Sue Tompkins. And she's going to look at not mental health in particular, but as a practicing homeopath and somebody who is well versed in medical astrology, she's going to be looking at the chart from a health and medical point of view. There's a nice 6th house manifestation just there. What I'm going to be looking at, it's Kim Kim, you're going to look at mental health in particular. Mine is a kind of middle ground where I'm trying to address the question that I get asked a lot, which is, and what about my health? It's one of those sort of door handle questions, which gets asked about 5 minutes before the end. And it's a difficult subject for any astrologer to work with, and not to get mired in the whole idea of trying to pick the chart apart in medical terms. And although I was a complementary therapist for several years, I'm not a medic. I'm not medically trained, so I wouldn't go there in medical terms. But I think there's a lot you can do. And Kim, you were alluding to this, the idea that you can use the astrological language, the symbolism, to find the parallel of a particular medical situation in terms of the psychology or the emotionality that might sit behind it. So the way that I would work with a chart, with somebody who asks me that question, is not to answer it on a very literal level, but to address maybe what's behind it, which is maybe a fear of something, the situation a person happens to find themselves in. What is it that brings that person a sense of well-being? How can I help them to see how they might support their own sense of well-being? What are the things that they can do for themselves to really work with that and support it? And I think so you don't have to actually step out of your role as just a standard astrologer who's not a medically trained person. You can actually use the language that you've got and the knowledge that you've got in order to be able to support that person's sense of well-being, with a little bit of understanding of how symptoms might play out. But I think it's important, if somebody tells you about a particular illness that they have, and I don't know how people necessarily find me in terms of this, but I get a lot of people who are unwell, who are ill, who've had maybe terminal diagnosis, and it's possible to find a way to work on a very deep level, but without going into the medical side of things. And it can be really powerful and really helpful for that person, I think. Yeah.
That's interesting, because also anxiety comes under this as well, doesn't it? Anxiousness, anxiety, and often the chart can, well, there's a lot of, for instance, squares in the chart, or there's lots of conflict in the chart. This person is going to have underlying anxiety, that perhaps things aren't as safe as they might be, or they're constantly fighting or feeling a need to, or drawing in conflict into their life. I'll put it that way. So I
absolutely.
think,
I mean, where the moon, for instance, our lunar functioning, our sense of what gives us a feeling of safety and security can get lost in those periods of time. Or what you were alluding to before, which is, I think, questions of mortality and illness, of course, if you think about life as one long, slow preparation for our eventual passing over to whatever we believe is beyond.
I mean, at the widest level, it's about being a human, isn't it? They're not separate things. As as Carole's talking about our sense of well-being, or the opposite. It's part of how we experience our aliveness, isn't it? And engaging with somebody at a deeper and more soulful level around that, rather than trying to find some astro rationalization for it, or astro band-aid for it.
I think it's people are so grateful that you're standing beside them for that period of time, and you're with them, and you're engaged, and you're interested in them. And that's
yeah,
itself, isn't it?
utterly. I think that is part of the healingness available in astrological consultation. And again, it goes back to receiving the person and as they are, not judging them, not trying to explain them away, not trying to invalidate or disagree with, but to just let them be who they are and hear it and listen. It's an act of love, I would say, a consultation,
Absolutely. Kim, just why do you want to offer this workshop on astrology and mental health?
Well, because I think it goes to the core of our experience of being alive. I can't say that I have any particular understanding of mental health more than another person. I've had my own tussles with things like almost everybody has, and people around me too, people close to me. And I think mental health is not separate from one's inner life or one's experience of day-to-day living. It's usually actually the framework within that, we contact that. And anxiety and talking about mental health and talking about things like anxiety has become much, much, much more
and depression, Kim.
usual. Yes. I mean, I know clearly that I was depressed as a child. I certainly didn't understand it as that when I was little, but I can now. And then when I was in my 20s, I had really what could be termed clinical depression, and off and on. So depression, which Sue Tompkins, when I was training with her in the late 80s, she referred to as the common cold of mental health, which has always stayed with me, and yeah, various.
Well said.
And it's partly a Moon Saturn thing in my chart or in my mind. And my mum, I have Moon in Cancer opposite Saturn, which is also conjunct Jupiter, and Saturn in Capricorn, Jupiter in Capricorn. And my mum was what they used to call in the 70s manic depressive. And the kind of literalness of having a Moon in Cancer opposite a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn in the 4th house, and having a mum who was diagnosed as manic depressive, which they call bipolar these days, but very mild. She certainly was very depressed a lot of the time. She was manic in the summer, depressed all the way through the winter. But I kind of recognized her states in my own childhood states. And so I think it's been a very early experience of kind of wondering about these things, being curious about them and trying to understand them and trying to live with them rather than get rid of them,
I think also it's providing a person with the opportunity to say, this is how I feel.
Yeah. To be listened to have the time.
With depression, it's so shameful to admit that you're depressed.
Yeah.
In our society, it's a failure.
Yeah.
It's a bit like people dying is a failure, and to be able to offer people that opportunity just to say, this is how I feel.
And that whole taxonomy of suffering, somehow, if you're not starving or you're not homeless or you haven't got cancer or you haven't just been made unemployed or got divorced, you're not allowed to be unhappy, or because existential suffering is real, isn't it?
And it's part of the human condition, but we don't honor that. I'm just conscious of time. I just want to start wrapping this up about your offering. Carole, just want to say what your vision now is in what you're going to be offering in 2025.
Well, we're continuing very much with our mentoring groups, our chart interpretation group and the professional supervision group. They're growing down into the experience of those, and it's in many ways it's the core of. I feel it's the core of what we're doing. We've got our workshops on mental health and on medical astrology and so on. We've also got a short course that we're running on the astrology of family dynamics, which is another whole area which is it's going to be quite tough to do justice to that in 4 sessions, but it's an area that I think, again, like health, it touches everybody's life, and the astrology is such a beautiful way of being able to explore the family field and our experience of the family in different ways. And we're starting a foundation course as well, which begins on the 20th of January. So, yes.
Exciting.
The only inauguration that really matters on that date. Yes.
Oh, that's absolutely I didn't know that. That's wonderful to hear. So how do people, if they want to sign up to your foundation course, they just go to Asteria? And I'll put all the links below for anybody who's interested. And how long does the foundation course last?
It lasts for a year. So there's 3 terms, and it begins in January, ends in December. 3 terms, the normal sort of system. And we'll be looking at all the different components of the chart and working towards, in the final term, putting the whole chart together and, how to read the whole chart, building up people's confidence. You can book by the term, you can book for the whole thing. It's also arranged in smaller units, so you can book for a particular unit if you want to as well, just to practice.
Yeah.
So we're a small group, quite intimate, lots of individual attention.
That's what's needed, isn't it? Confidence building, and encouraging people to unwrap who they are as an astrologer as well, just as we were saying at the start of this conversation. Just to wrap things up, Kim, is there anything you'd like to say to anyone who's thinking of training as astrologer or coming on your course? What would you like to say to them?
Well, I guess I'd like to say to anyone brand new to the subject, it is the most fascinating and rich and best thing that you could ever, align yourself with. It just never stops being magical and mysterious and helpful and real. I guess most people who listen will already be on the path in some way. But yeah, come, have a look at the website that Carole has created for us, and I am eternally grateful for that. It's a thing of simple beauty, and it shows all the different offerings that we've got. And our main headline is astrology for the joy of it, and that's really the central idea and ideal for us, is that we love this craft, we love this discipline, we love this practice. We also love teaching and sharing it with people. And we are definitely interested in an open and creative approach and a soulful approach. So yeah, check it out, have a look, see if something grabs your fancy, because it's a small project, but it's quite precious to us, and we care a lot about what we're doing here, or what we're trying to do.
You created a crucible for people.
Right.
That feels like to me.
And it is about support. 2 moon in Cancers, Carole?
Absolutely.
2 moons in Cancer, there you go.
Containers for emotional development and support.
So is there anything else that you'd like to say to somebody who's listening about, maybe they're thinking about training, or they are, or what would you like to say to budding astrologers?
I think astrology is such a huge subject area, and there's lots and lots of different ways of approaching it and practicing it. You could lose yourself down rabbit holes and going on the internet, connecting with people. It's such a vast field. It's really easy to be put off by the seeming complexity of it. And it is a complex subject. It's had horoscopic astrology just itself has had over 2,000 years to develop. There's lots of techniques, lots of stuff that you could engage with. I think what you have to hold on to is what Kim was just talking about, the idea of the magic of it, your own relationship to it, the fact that it means something to you. It can help you to think about the context of your life and the meaning of it, to put yourself into the context of your own family history, for instance, to think about the ancestral threads within your own chart. It provides meaning and context, and to work with it in a sense of genuineness and making and creativity, and making your own relationship to it and holding fast to that. And I think for both of us, Asteria is a place where people can come and feel safe and feel that they can, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's just the question that you didn't ask. So the idea of being a place where people where people can engage with education in the literal sense of the drawing out of what is already there and the sense of a magical connection to this subject. So Kim and I will always be committed to that process of helping people. We've been doing it for years in the faculty. Now here we are doing it in Asteria. Absolutely marvellous. I love it. And what I say also is when astrology calls you, there's no escape.
I'll say. Thank goodness.
No escape. Yeah. Marvellous. Thank you both so much for such an enlightening conversation. It's just been such a joy to speak to you both. And yes, the links will be below on how you can get them in both.
And we've got a free webinar tomorrow on Neptune and Aries, as a last minute blast. Yes.
Yeah. And there'll be another one next term on
Uranus and Gemini.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I'll see you both later.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Carole.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.